was having read this book,
Okay.
Michael
Yeah.
Denton's Evolution of Theory and Crisis. This was published in 1985. That's 40 years
Hmm.
ago.
Hmm.
Darwinism is constantly faced with anomalies that it just either ignores or it redraws the tree of life to include these anomalies. And those anomalies never overthrow the paradigm.
Welcome back to Incisive Thoughts. And today's discussion literally is going to be groundbreaking for all of us because today I have something very, very, very special for all of you. Today's guest is going to be Dr. Jerome Thomas Bridges, a philosopher of science whose work explores the relationship between scientific realism and Darwinism. He is the author of Beyond Origins, a post Darwinian design theory, where he develops a groundbreaking framework called genomic design theory, offering a fresh alternative to Neo Darwinism. In my opinion, I have never seen this anywhere. By combining insights from philosophy, biology, and information theory, he proposes this new alternative to Darwinism. And I'm really interested to dive deep into this. And I'm really honored to have such a renowned guest on my platform. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. J.T. Bridges.
Khalid, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Welcome to Incisive Thoughts.
Thank you.
So we are going to talk about an alternative to Darwinism, which you provide. But before that, I think we can divide this discussion into three sections.
Mm-hmm.
First section is going to be about Neo-Darwinism and evolutionary biology itself, because I think this is where we have to start from. This is the fundamentals. And my first question for you would be, is Neo-Darwinism a legitimate bona fide theory like Big Bang cosmology or uh, other things, or not? Yes or no?
Yes and no. So this is sort of the bread and butter of philosophers. The answer is yes and no. So
Okay.
the question is Neo-Darwinian theory a bona fide scientific theory? And the answer to that is yes.
Hmm.
It's dealing largely with natural history, paleontology as it emerges in the geologic order of things. It's trying to deal with a bunch of different disciplines like population genetics and things like that. So it's really trying to offer a fairly comprehensive view of not necessarily the origin of life, which is a study of chemistry and biochemistry, but once life begins, how does it continue and then diversify in the ways that we see, increasing in complexity over time, and then leading up ultimately to the origin of man, I would say. So, in that sense, yes, Darwinism is a fairly wide-ranging scientific theory. Is it the same kind of theory as something like Big Bang cosmology? And that's where I would say no. Um,
Okay.
and we can get into that as we get into more of the philosophy of science approach that I advocate.
Okay. Yeah. So, what is going to be different when it comes to neo-Darwinism? Because everyone is gonna generally be the layman thinks that okay, all scientific theories are the same. So
Yeah.
you are proposing that no, all scientific theories are not the same. Why is that the case?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Is in the philosophy of science, this is called the received view, where sort of the layperson's view of natural science, and it starts with, and this is a pet peeve of mine, it starts with using the term science as a generic term. There's science, and I understand sort of the shortcut usage, science, religion, art, right? These are sort of these shortcuts. But then when we drill
Hmm.
down and try and define what is science, what is religion, what
Hmm.
is art, it sort of slips out of our grasp trying to provide something like necessary and sufficient conditions for the term. So some philosophers of science and myself included, I prefer the phrase the natural sciences rather than just science. Because when we come to the natural sciences, we have things very diverse. you mentioned Big Bang cosmology, particle physics, quantum
Hmm.
theory, chemistry, biochemistry, marine biology and botany, right? Genetics, anatomy and physiology that lend themselves to the medical sciences. And then you have things like evolutionary biology, right? So while all of these things are natural sciences, and the natural sciences, I would say they are they're coherent with one another in terms of their methodology. That is, whether you're looking at botany or quantum theory, a natural scientist is trying to use um, is trying to get at causes and effects in nature about nature, right? So they're not going to introduce sort of spiritual realities or metaphysical reasoning. They're just going to look
Hmm.
at how natural causes lead to natural effects in whatever scope of natural phenomena that they're studying: quantum theory, botany, marine biology, anatomy, physiology, whatever it is, right? Astronomy. So once we start getting into the notion of not science as generic, but the sciences as a continuum or spectrum of different disciplines with different methodologies, studying different aspects at different levels of natural phenomena.
Hmm.
Once you start doing that, you go, okay, not all scientific theories are the same. Certainly,
Hmm.
the methodologies and the approaches of, say, um, we'll just go with something like marine biology, right? The study of whales or sharks, right? Their feeding, their reproductive, their migration habits, right? What causes aggression in males or dominance in females, or what is the social hierarchy like among this species or that species, right? Those sorts of studies are going to be much more qualitative than quantitative. Um,
Okay.
and so we'll say they're much less quantitatively precise. So if we
Hmm.
going back to so let me take a step back. Going back to epistemology, the study of human knowing, right?
Hmm.
So in my sort of telescoping out of the different aspects of philosophical discourse, I would locate the philosophy of science as downstream, immediately parallel to or downstream of epistemology. So epistemology is how humans know. Science or the sciences are specific ways of knowing, right? And so
Okay.
they're governed by broader epistemological considerations. So that's actually where my research started. I started looking at the neo-Darwinism intelligent design debate, and I what occurred to me was this is a debate between two different kinds of science. Well, what is the discipline that studies the sciences as paradigms or as theories? It's not the
Hmm.
sciences. The sciences use their theories to study natural phenomena.
Right.
It's the philosophy of science that
Hmm.
studies the nature of science, right? And then as I started diving into the philosophy of science, there were philosophers of science who, for example, Karl Popper, in some moods, adopts assumptions from people like David Hume. Nancy Cartwright is very explicitly Kantian in her approach. Somebody like Richard Boyd will adopt epistemological aspects of W.V. Quine's work in his sort of naturalized epistemology. And so, being a Thomist, that is somebody who largely follows Thomas Aquinas's philosophical work, although I'm not Roman Catholic. Um, my question was, how is a Thomistic epistemology going to
Hmm.
give rise to a specific kind? So if Karl Popper can follow David Hume and Nancy Cartwright can follow Immanuel Kant and Richard Boyd can follow W.V. Quine, why can't I follow Aquinas's starting points in terms
Hmm.
of his philosophical anthropology and epistemology and build a uniquely Thomistic philosophy of science? Now, the there's a it gets a little tricky because Aquinas is writing in the 13th century. So we don't need to get into the details of that. But what
Yeah.
that,
So
yeah, go ahead.
one question I have is like for the audience to
Mm-hmm.
understand, they you have this diagram which is on this, like which you created, which I think was really profound, which is on the screen.
Yeah.
We can start with, maybe if you can give us a brief explanation, very short, because I know these topics are very deep. What is realism and anti-realism? Because I think people might just like, like, oh, we don't even know that. So
Got it.
if
Yeah.
you can give
No.
us a brief.
Yeah, that's good. So if you look at the sort of the I just call it a pyramid of philosophy. You have your
Yeah.
metaphysics, your commitments about ultimate reality, and then probably within metaphysics or between metaphysics and philosophical anthropology, I could have put philosophy of nature.
Oh.
It's a debate whether or not philosophy of nature is properly understood as a subset of metaphysics or not. So but uh,
Hmm.
philosophical anthropology is just your philosophical understanding about the nature of man. So, like, is man merely material as a thing,
Hmm.
or is man something more like an embodied soul? Right.
Hmm.
So we'll skip ahead from epistemology to philosophy of science. Philosophy of science as an extension of epistemology, human knowing, the realism anti-realism continuum. So the other thing that I met with in philosophy of science is not only are they beholden to sort of early and late modern, some contemporary epistemologies, but it really, and this is not unusual in the Anglo-American analytic philosophy, is there's this dichotomy between realism and anti-realism,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So you have people like Richard Boyd, who's a strong realist in his philosophy of science. You have somebody who's not as strong, but is still maintains a kind of realism, and John Worrell, his specifically his structural realism. And then you have anti-realists like a David Papineau or a Bos Van Frossen or I don't know if Larry Loudon would be, but I think Larry Loudon would be an anti-realist. So anti-realists, okay, I'll just say this. Realists in their philosophy of science. So philosophy of science is a commentary, among other things, on the nature of science.
Hmm.
Realists are largely going to have three fundamental commitments. Ontological commitment would be that what science studies is real, right? Our instruments give us access to objects that are very far away, that are very small, that are moving very fast. But the objects that we're studying are real. What we know about them through our theory is true, and the language that we use about them is literal. It's not metaphorical, or it's not, it's literally true. So an ontological, an epistemological, and a linguistic commitment on the realist side of things.
Hmm.
So anti-realism, or the varieties of anti-realism, are going to deny at least one or more of those realist commitments. So they're going to deny that the objects that we study are actually real. Some people will say, well, we don't even know if electrons exist, right? They're going to deny that that the theory gives us literal truth, or that the language that we use in the theory is to be taken literally. Now, the way Bos Van Frossen sets it up is he'll say something like, the aim of science is not necessarily to get at literal truth, literal reality. It's not supposed to tell us the truth about reality. So that gives us our epistemology and our metaphysics. But science and scientific theories are they largely arise in the mind of the scientist, and then the theory is used at this theoretical to frame the data, to
Hmm.
frame the data, and to give the data, which otherwise would be sort of all over the place, to give it a coherent, logical orientation. But it's not meant to give us what's actually true. So as I was approaching this
Yeah.
from
So
yeah, go ahead.
before like, we go into that subject, I just hope that we've not lost anyone So in
Okay.
this conversation, so I just want to summarize what is going on in a
Yeah,
very
go ahead.
oversimplified manner. So in this pyramid, what you're trying to explain is that science does not just comes out of thin air. There is a lot of metaphysics, philosophical anthropology, epistemology, and philosophy of science. All of this has to be in place first, and then we are able to do science in some sense. And within this, maybe there are some debates. So we are not going to go deep into metaphysics or philosophical anthropology or even epistemology for now, because we are short for time. We will just move into the philosophy of science. As you mentioned, within philosophy of science, there is a debate between philosophers as to if the sciences that we have are they true descriptions of reality, or are they something that we are getting closer to reality by every theory or something along the lines.
Yeah.
This is what you're getting at. So I
Yes.
hope people are following. So now we'll just talk about the philosophy of science and what science is. And so you gave us two two or a few camps. Some people are hardcore realist, which means that they think that science is going to give us true descriptions of reality. But there's
That's
a
right.
problem there, because for example, we had Newtonian theory, and someone could expect that Newtonian theory is giving us a true description of reality. But as we got new observations and new theory came in which were able to explain the data far better, and we had to actually do a paradigm shift which showed that Newtonian theory was not actually giving us a true description of reality. Maybe it was something trying to explain the data in some sense. So there's an issue there. How do you resolve the issue, or what do you see, like what should we do in this issue of conflict between realism and anti-realism?
Yeah. So if we go back to, and I'll get back to the Newton versus Einstein example that you gave in a minute. But if we go back to the fact that we don't have science, we have the natural sciences.
Hmm. Hmm.
The natural sciences, although similar in methodological approach, they are they are distinct. A geneticist and an evolutionary biologist, they study biology in different ways. Um, uh, I think Robert Carroll will say he's a paleontologist. Robert Carroll will say something like genetics and paleontology are so different as sciences. They have different journals that they publish in. They have different conferences that they attend. So although they may be sort of loosely along the spectrum of sort of an evolutionary view, the sciences and their methodology are fairly distinct from one another.
Hmm.
And so the question is, and this is the this leads up to not the dichotomy of realism versus anti-realism, but a continuum of realism, anti-realism. So in my Thomistic epistemology approach to philosophy of science, because the human knower is the same, but the object studied is different, right?
Hmm.
The empirical access that we have to botany, right? Plants and animals, botany
Hmm.
and zoology is different than the kind of access we have to the data coming out of the Large Hadron Collider,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So there's a directness versus an indirectness between studying, say, plants and their properties, and studying the Higgs boson, right?
Right.
And so the question is, when should we be more realist, and when should we be more anti-realist about a
Hmm.
science, right?
Right.
So this gives us going back to your early comment about approaching the sciences on a case by case basis. So instead of just saying, "Am I a realist about science?" That's a fairly clunky philosophical thing to say. I'm a realist about science. So you're a realist about botany in the same way as you are early cosmology? That doesn't seem right.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So what we're getting at is this epistemological notion of what kind of access does the human knower have to the object known? Do we have a
Hmm.
robust sort of medium-sized object that we're studying, plants, animals, right?
Hmm.
Or do we have a literally an unobservable object, right?
Hmm.
something like an electron or a quark. It's literally
Exactly.
unobservable, and the properties that it has have to be known through very precise instrumentation and very precise quantification.
Right.
So a botanist may be able to walk down a nature trail and say and start naming the different aspects of just by sight, right?
Hmm.
But a quantum mechanist can't do that with fundamental particles, right?
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
he could say based on precise mathematical measurements of say energy levels. This is a positron. This is an electron. This is a up quark, down right. So, so those are two different kinds of knowing, and those are two different ways in which we know these objects. And so, John Worrall, that I mentioned earlier, he has what's called a structural realist approach. That is, when it comes to these very, very small uh, aspects of reality, fundamental particles, etc. We don't understand the natures of these things. We don't know them as substances. Like
Hmm.
we don't
Right.
know them the same way we know dogs and cats and humans and trees, right?
Right. Right.
We don't take them in holistically, right? Largely we come to understand them by breaking them apart and seeing what's inside. But we do understand their form or their structure because of the precise quantification that we have for these things.
Hmm.
And there's a there's an inductive aspect to it. That is, we run these same experiments multiple times, getting the same results. And so it gives us confidence to say, okay, this is the electron signature of a positron, right? So
Okay.
so there are
Yes.
these two fundamental epistemological aspects. What kind of object are we studying, and what sort of empirical access do we have to it? And um and is this process open to induction? And as these objects recede to the very, very small, or the very, very large and far back in time, or the very, very far away, we can retain a thread of realism in our scientific theory because these objects maintain a precise numeric value, a precise quantification, right? But when it comes to and so when it comes to things like marine biology and botany, we don't need that level of precise quantification because we have a more sort of natural human inductive access
Direct.
to these
Yeah.
objects. Yeah. So
Yeah.
now,
So
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 yeah, go ahead.
just allow me, so that of course these things can be a little heavy for a layman. So
Yeah,
just so that everyone's following what's going on, I might keep doing this so that everyone's on the same page. So
absolutely.
anti-realism and realism, you're talking about. So what you said makes a lot of sense. You're
Mm,
saying that just taking a hardcore anti-realist approach is also problematic, because
yes,
you can't say that a botanist would say that, oh, when he's describing, for example, giving names to some species in front of him, you cannot say that this is not a true description of reality. That
right.
can be a problem. And at the same time, a hardcore and realist approach is also problematic, because there are some scientific disciplines which actually are very uh, more abstract, or I could say more obscure in some sense,
Obscure.
where
Yeah,
they're not
yeah,
obscure, because they are not actually directly talking about observation, but there is maybe they're open to a lot of different like they're open to induction, and you can change aspects within it in future. So they're open to anomalies as well.
yeah.
So a better approach is to take everything on a case by case basis.
Yes,
And yes, and then you mentioned that we'll have a criteria to to judge, and that criteria was things that are more direct, in the sense, things that are in some sense, you, if things are way back in the past, there seems to be an issue. Can you clarify this a little bit,
yeah.
and then we can
So
move on?
so the phrase that I use is our what is our natural epistemic range, right?
Hmm.
I mean, we can see like in an individual grain of salt or sand, and we can see with the naked eye certain astronomical objects, the sun, the moon, the planets, right? So
Hmm.
we have a natural epistemic range that doesn't rely on precise instrumentation, right?
Hmm.
But we also have things like electron microscopes, right? That can
Hmm.
get down to looking at things at the atomic level. We have like the James Webb telescope that can look at things that are billions of light years away in terms of distance and time. Once we start using these kinds of instrumentation, the question becomes: are the objects we're observing through these instruments, should we be realist or anti-realist about those
Right.
objects? And
Right.
and the point that I make is that yes, we can maintain a thread of realism about those objects because we can describe those objects with a precise quantification.
Okay. Now I get it. Yeah. Okay.
And not only can we describe them with a precise quantification, um, as we run experiments and get the same quantitative values about these objects, we can be reassured that these quantities really are describing different objects: electron, positron, up and down quarks,
Hmm.
in a consistent manner, because upon inductive repeatability, right,
Hmm.
we get the same values over and over again. And so this is why uh, in quantum mechanics, for example, which is extremely precise, although it is dealing with naturally unobservable objects, right? They're too small. They fall outside of our natural epistemic range. We still think that, given the experiments and the quantitative analysis, we still think that that fundamental reality is something like quantitative, even though we don't really understand the natures of these objects the way we do
Okay.
more medium-sized objects,
Hmm.
right? So with this criteria in place, we have a kind of a standard, an epistemological standard for our eclecticism. When does a theory become more realist? When does it become a little bit less realist? So I would say things like marine biology and botany. There you go.
Hmm.
Molecular biology, things that are closer to our natural epistemic range, we're going to feel more secure that what we're saying about them through our scientific analysis is is true, right?
Okay.
As things start to recede there to the quantum mechanical level on one side and to the early cosmology, we can still be realists, but I would say that we understand the structure of those realities more than the nature of those realities,
Okay. Yeah. Hmm.
right? So we understand their mathematical structure, even if we can't really get at what these substances are really like, because they fall outside of our natural epistemic range.
Hmm.
And then mathematics is the quantification is the thread that quantification and induction is the thread that sort of maintains that realism line. So the
Perfect.
question is, are there sciences whose objects are not precisely quantified and
Hmm.
not open to induction? And
Hmm.
that's where I this is why a philosophy of science approach to the neo-Darwinism question, I think, is very helpful, because
Right.
we start off with talking about what is human knowing? How do humans know things, right?
Hmm.
And then from that epistemological commitment, we develop an eclectic philosophy of science. The sciences are not monolithic. They study different objects in nature at different levels with different levels of inductive access. Okay, but there's still a broad swath of kinds of realism about the natural sciences. But then when we get to paleontology and natural history, right, which is largely the domain of neo-Darwinian theory, we say, okay, given how humans know things, how humans know what things are the objects of paleontological study precisely quantified in the same way that the objects of chemistry and physics are? And the answer is no.
Right. Right.
Um, they aren't. They're largely fractured incomplete skeletal
Hmm.
remains that have been fossilized in the geologic column, right?
Hmm.
So um, David Berlinski says this in a Expelled, that documentary from the early 2000s. He says because David Berlinski, although he has some philosophy training, he's mainly a mathematician. First book I ever read by him was A Tour of the Calculus, which I don't recommend. I'm not a mathematician, and it was
Hmm.
hard going for me. But what he says in Expelled is he says there is a descending line of intelligibility. He says biology lacks all of the it lacks all of the empirical the intelligibility of mathematical physics. And he says, and mathematical physics lacks the intelligibility of pure mathematics. So
Wow.
you have pure mathematics that can be done apart from any empirical study. Then you have something like mathematical physics that, as highly abstract as it is mathematically, it is still bound in some way by some empirical considerations.
Hmm.
And he says there is a descending line of intelligibility until you get down to the level of evolutionary biology. And
Oh.
it goes from extreme clarity from uh, think about the intellect perceiving something.
Hmm.
The intellect perceiving pure mathematics, there's a clarity, a crispness there to the
Hmm.
intelligibility of those objects. Then when
Hmm.
it gets down to evolutionary biology, there's a descent into what he calls a fog.
Wow.
So when you get down to just by tracing out how humans know things and what is the nature of the object known in the science that we're considering, the objects of evolutionary biology, largely fragmented fossils in the geologic column, the intelligibility is very low of these objects in terms of what they are, what they were, how they functioned, right? And then
Right.
you say, okay, well, they're not very highly quantifiable,
Right.
but what kind of inductive access do we have to them, right?
Right.
And the
So
answer is none.
none
We
exactly.
have so this is where in the past creationists or intelligent design theorists will say, see, Darwinism is false. I go, no, no, no,
Hmm.
wait. We're
Hmm.
not there yet. We're not saying
Hmm.
Darwinism is false. All we're doing at this stage is we're saying among scientific theories, given an eclectic philosophy of science that doesn't treat science
Right.
monolithically,
Right.
is neo-Darwinism the kind of science that lends itself more toward a robust realism? Or does it, because it doesn't have these features of precise quantification or inductive access, does it push us more toward anti-realism?
Anti. Right.
And I would say, I think judiciously, fairly,
Yeah.
objectively, it pushes us more toward anti-realism. So back to your
Exactly.
very, very first question, is
Yes. So just
neo-Darwinism? Yeah, go
so
ahead.
yeah. So just 1 second. So uh, I would still consider myself as a layman, and I way back in the past, like I was going through just studying evolutionary biology as it is, and I had these two quotes because for laymen they might get it because it just capture one aspect of evolutionary biology which is different. And always used to wonder that, okay, evolutionary biology here is a subject, even as a lame, like even as like very simplified understanding was that it seems to be different than chemistry and physics in some or the other way. Like for example, this quote says that science seeks to explain the behavior of that which is and to check its explanation by means of experiments, but this experimental requirement can be met only in the present time. The past and especially the beginning of things lies beyond the grasp of this method, and so science can only speculate about the origin of history and of the world. Dr. Yamina is not like a full expert on this, but she says something which I found to be profound. She said that when we talk about the history of life on Earth and overwhelming majority of events that have taken place, history are inaccessible to us. Furthermore, we have no way of repeating them in the lab. We should take note that this fact alone makes the subject of the history of life very different than physics and chemistry, where we can, for instance, currently observe the falling of objects in the lab or rerun a chemical experiment. So
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. And the reason this is important rhetorically in culture is that and there I don't know what the experience is outside the United States, but there's this experience where if you start to deny that neo-Darwinism is literally true,
right.
those who are those who are bent on defending the neo-Darwinian view, they will say that, and I've seen quotes almost exactly like this: neo-Darwinism is science just like physics is science, and
Hmm.
therefore if you reject neo-Darwinism, you're basically anti-science, and you're
Exactly.
anti-science because of your religious biases.
Hmm.
So when I came to this, I said, okay, and this may be a good way to transition into the intelligent design neo-Darwinism debate. So let's see.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, before we transition, yeah,
Yeah.
so go ahead, go ahead.
So let me sort of land the plane on part one, as it were.
Hmm.
So if this is correct, that the natural sciences should not be treated monolithically, they should be treated eclectically on a case by case basis. If the approach to them should be this epistemological one, that is, how do humans know things and what are the objects known? If it is the case that, given this eclecticism, the nature of neo-Darwinian theory pushes us more toward anti-realism than realism, the question then becomes, what kind of anti-realism, right?
Hmm. Perfect.
And
Yeah.
so because anti-realism isn't monolithic, there are different kinds of anti-realism, and they're motivated in different ways. And the clue for me was, I was reading Richard Boyd, who's a strong realist, and he was criticizing Bos van Frossen's constructivism. And one of his
Hmm.
criticisms of Van Frossen's now keep in mind, this is holistic realism versus anti. So Bos van Frossen, as an anti-realist, is a holistic anti-realist. That is, he thinks all of science is just a construct. Astronomy,
Hmm.
physics, chemistry, everything is just a construct. It's not aimed at truth. These theoretical elements arise in the mind of the scientist, and their purpose is to orient the data, right? So
Hmm.
that's Van Frossen. Richard Boyd, who's a strong realist, all science is real. It tells us the truth of things, whether that's physics or chemistry, right? So this is that sort of realism, anti-realism dichotomy that we were talking about earlier. So Boyd is criticizing Van Frossen's constructivism, and what Boyd uh, criticizes is that if Van Frossen's constructivism were true about science in general, then it would be impossible for anomalies to arise that could push back against the paradigm,
Hmm.
because every anomaly would be read through the assumptions of the paradigm and not outside of those assumptions.
Right.
But we know in the history of the sciences, astronomy, you mentioned the changeover from Newtonian to Einsteinian physics.
Hmm.
We know that there are instances in the history of science where anomalies do push back against the
Right.
paradigm and cause a scientific revolution.
Hmm.
Now, in reading that, what struck me was having read this book,
Okay.
Michael
Yeah.
Denton's Evolution of Theory and Crisis. This was published in 1985. That's 40 years
Hmm.
ago.
Wow.
And when I was doing this research in the say 2010s or so, and reading through the philosophy of science with this sort of Thomistic eye, what struck me was, but that's exactly what Darwinism does.
Hmm.
Darwinism is constantly faced with anomalies that it just either ignores, or
Yeah.
it wraps them into, it just sort of ad hoc redraws the tree of life to include these anomalies, and those anomalies never overthrow the paradigm.
Right, and the anomalies are increasing with my view, like day by day. Like the more we see, the more anomalies
Yeah.
we find out. Okay, yeah, it fails to explain this aspect also. It fails to
Yeah.
explain that aspect also. But for just for the audience, what an anomaly is, if you can just give a
Oh,
very
so
brief
an anomaly
explanation.
is something that I would say it this way. An anomaly is some piece of data or evidence that falls outside of the predictive power of the paradigm.
Okay,
So the
yeah.
paradigm is built on certain assumptions and measurements and confirmations. It has a predictive power, when water boils on a mountaintop, it boils faster than it boils at sea level or below sea level. Well,
Hmm.
our understanding of gas pressure and chemistry, it can interpret all of those evidences, right? Um, so our current understanding of chemistry is there's nothing about those scenarios that fall outside of the predictability of,
Hmm.
say, of our understanding of chemistry. So an anomaly is something where some evidence arises that does fall outside of the predictive range of a theory. The theory
Something
didn't
unexpected.
That's right. The theory didn't predict it, and it can't account for it, right?
Hmm.
So as these anomalies, if they're significant, if they are penetrating, they can push back against the assumptions in the paradigm, and historically, if they mount, can
Right.
cause scientific revolutions,
So
right?
just like we can take the example of heliocentrism and geocentrism. So
Yes,
we
yes,
saw
right.
so many anomalies one by one. I'm like, okay, now we have to understand that okay, these are not
Yeah,
circulating or orbiting around the Earth. There might be some
that's right.
other explanation, and we change the paradigm because of that,
That's
because
right.
of the
Yeah,
anomalies.
that's right. So the Earth is
But
no longer the center of the solar system. The sun is, and that
yeah,
makes
but then when it comes to when it comes to Darwinism,
mhm.
so anomalies are increasing as you're saying, or anomalies are there and they are penetrating, but it's not there isn't any paradigm shift that's happening. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. And so this gets us to the question of, if neo-Darwinism as a theory
Hmm.
is a is more anti-realist than it is realist. What kind of anti-realism explains what neo-Darwinism is as a theory? And my suggestion is that Bos van Frossen's constructive empiricism
Hmm.
explains better the kind of theory that we're dealing with in neo-Darwinism. That is,
Okay.
the orientation of the data largely arises in the mind of the scientists. The
Hmm.
scientists bring their assumptions to the data, and the data is oriented based on those assumptions,
Perfect.
as opposed to what we see in physics and astronomy, where the precise quantification of these anomalies uh,
Hmm.
required a paradigm change. The largely logical and narrative structure of neo-Darwinism, it just doesn't allow for that.
Okay. Perfect. So I think we, I don't believe like you. We are on time, like exactly 45 minutes. I think
Okay.
we can conclude on our first section,
Okay.
which was my first question that I asked you, which is evolutionary biology or neo-Darwinism theory same as, let's say, big bang cosmology or zoology or botany? And what we conclude here is that no, evolution or like neo-Darwinism is a theory which needs to be interpreted in a more anti-realist framework because of the reasons that we highlighted. So I
Yeah.
think this is the conclusion we have to conclude in this section, or maybe we can move on to the next section.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then we can ask the question: if not neo-Darwinism, then what? Right?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
so so before you we jump into this topic, I think we can end this episode here, and next episode next episode,
Oh, yeah.
I want you guys to actually hold on. It will be coming soon, and we will touch on a very interesting topic. So thank you guys for joining in, and please await part 2.